They called him a god while the streets ran red beneath his palace walls. And when his empire finally collapsed, his name was carved out of stone, scraped from records, and cursed never to be spoken again. Tonight, we're not telling the story of great conquerors or golden ages. We're uncovering the Devil Kings of Antiquity, rulers so cruel, so terrifying, that later civilizations tried to erase them from memory itself. Not defeated by armies, not toppled by rivals, but buried by history. In the ancient world, kingship was not just political, it was cosmic. A ruler was the bridge between heaven and earth. If the king pleased the gods, the rivers flooded on time, the harvest grew, and the sun rose again. But if the king was the god, then who could stop him? The world before restraint. To understand these rulers, we have to abandon modern assumptions. There were no human rights, no constitutions, no concept that a ruler could be wrong. Power came from divinity, conquest, or terror, often all three. And when kings believed themselves chosen by the gods, cruelty was not a flaw. It was proof of authority. Yet even in the brutal ancient world, some rulers crossed lines so extreme that later generations tried to pretend they had never existed. Our first story begins in the shadow of the pyramids, long after they were built, when Egypt was already ancient and already afraid. Akhenaten, the pharaoh who broke reality. At first, he seemed like a reformer. Amenhotep IV inherited the most powerful kingdom on earth around 1350 BCE. Egypt was rich, stable, and favored by the gods, or at least by many gods. That was the problem. Amenhotep looked at Egypt's pantheon and saw corruption, priests growing powerful, temples hoarding wealth, a universe divided. So he did the unthinkable. He erased them. Amenhotep renamed himself Akhenaten, servant of the Aten, and declared there was only one god, the Aten, the blazing disk of the sun. This wasn't philosophical monotheism. This was obsession. Akhenaten shut down temples across Egypt. He stripped priesthoods of power. He ordered the names of gods, even Amen, the king of the pantheon, chiseled off walls. And then he went further. He abandoned Thebes, Egypt's sacred capital, and built a new city in the desert, Akhetaten, a place meant to exist only for him and his god. There, he ruled as the Aten's living conduit. But Egypt began to rot. Foreign enemies attacked Egypt's borders. Allies begged for military aid. Akhenaten ignored them, consumed by ritual and theology. Famine spread. Grain shipments failed. Disease followed. And when people prayed for help, Akhenaten had taken their gods away. By the time he died, Egypt was fractured, weak, and furious. What followed was not just a political reversal. It was historical annihilation. His successors dismantled his city stone by stone. His images were smashed, his name removed from king lists. To later Egyptians, Akhenaten wasn't a heretic. He was a cosmic mistake, so dangerous that history itself had to forget him. Ashurnasirpal II, terror as policy. If Akhenaten ruled through belief, Ashurnasirpal II ruled through fear. In the 9th century BCE, Assyria was rising, and Ashurnasirpal made sure the world noticed. His empire expanded, not because enemies feared defeat, but because they feared survival. Ashurnasirpal carved his victories into stone reliefs, and what they show is chilling. Prisoners flayed alive, skins nailed to city walls, heads stacked into pyramids, survivors impaled along roads as warnings. This was not hidden cruelty. This was propaganda. Ashurnasirpal believed terror was mercy. If cities surrendered immediately, fewer would die. If they resisted, annihilation followed. And it worked. Cities opened their gates at the sound of Assyrian drums. Yet even by Assyrian standards, Ashurnasirpal disturbed later kings. His inscriptions are disturbingly casual, boasts of torture written with pride. When Assyria finally fell centuries later, its enemies destroyed its palaces and burned its records. Greek historians would later describe Assyria as a nightmare civilization, powerful, brutal, and gone. Ashurnasirpal survived only in fragments, a ghost of cruelty, too vivid to preserve fully. Wu Zetian's forgotten predecessor, the emperor who fed on death. In ancient China, history was written by the victors, and moral order mattered, which is why the reign of King Zhou of Shang, the last ruler of the Shang dynasty, reads like a horror legend. According to later Zhou historians, King Zhou ruled through excess and ritual murder. He built pools filled with wine, forests hung with meat. He executed critics publicly. He invented new tortures, bronze pillars heated until victims burned alive as crowds watched. His favorite concubine, Daji, became the symbol of decadence. Together, they were said to perform sacrificial killings, not for gods, but for entertainment. Were these stories exaggerated? Almost certainly. But that's the point. When the Zhou dynasty overthrew the Shang around 1046 BCE, they needed justification. They created the mandate of heaven, the idea that rulers governed only while morally worthy. King Zhou became the embodiment of why heaven withdrew its favor. His name was preserved not as a ruler, but as a warning. A monster shaped by moral storytelling, whose true life vanished beneath layers of political necessity. History didn't just erase him, it weaponized him. Caligula, Rome's unperson. Rome, unlike most ancient civilizations, believed deeply in memory. To be remembered was immortality, which made damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory, the ultimate punishment. And few emperors earned it, like Caligula. When he took power in 37 CE, Rome celebrated. He was young, charismatic, the son of a beloved general. Then something broke. Caligula declared himself a living god. He dressed as Jupiter. He ordered temples to worship him. He allegedly planned to make his horse a consul, not as a joke, but as humiliation. He executed senators at random, confiscated estates, held mock trials where guilt was guaranteed. Rome became afraid of its emperor. After 4 years, the Praetorian Guard assassinated him in a palace corridor. What followed was surgical erasure. Statues destroyed, coins melted, his name scratched out of inscriptions. But memory is stubborn. Caligula survives not because Rome preserved him, but because Rome couldn't fully forget him. Why history buried them. So why were these rulers erased, condemned, or twisted into legends? Because they threatened something deeper than politics. They challenged the idea that power could be restrained, that kings answered to gods, law, or morality, that order mattered. By erasing them, later societies weren't just judging cruelty. They were restoring balance. These Devil Kings became boundaries, proof of how far authority could go before the world pushed back. Their absence in the record isn't an accident, it's a scar. And yet, their stories still surface, in broken inscriptions, in hostile chronicles, in myths that refuse to stay buried. Because history doesn't just remember heroes, it remembers warnings. And the echoes of these erased rulers shaped how future civilizations defined kingship, law, and the limits of power for centuries to come. If you enjoy stories like this, forgotten rulers, buried truths, and the shadows of ancient history, subscribe for more chapters history tried to erase. Because sometimes the most important stories are the ones someone wanted you to forget.